Congressman Matt Gaetz, who argues that beyond the House, all Russia probes should effectively end, including the investigation by Bob Mueller. Congressman Matt Gaetz, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you being here. Let's start with this point. Is your view that nothing else can be achieved by the House, by the Congress that you're in on the Russia probe, and that Mueller should also end now?
Well, I have concerns with Mr. Mueller as it relates to bias, him in particular, not necessarily the concept of an investigation. I think a point that was missed in your discussion with Mr. Schiff is that this is an interim report, Ari. No one's saying that if there's new evidence that's discovered, if there's a basis to go and conduct more interviews or request more documents, that wouldn't be allowed under the current structure of the Intelligence Committee. It's just that after 14 months of the Trump presidency, it was an important time to update the American people that as we stand today, there is no evidence that Trump or his team colluded with Russia.
You're saying Republicans, though, should be open to reopening this if need be?
Of course. If there's new evidence that arises, you have to be able to exercise your oversight function. And I believe that when the written report comes out from Mr. Conaway and his team, you'll see that it's designated as an interim report, letting the American people know where we stand today.
You said something about the Mueller probe, when you're a noted critic, that really caught my eye. You said it seemed to be going nowhere. This was a little bit earlier. And I just wanted to kind of go over the record and look. Paul Manafort indicted in October. George Papadopoulos pleading guilty in October. Michael Flynn pleading guilty in December. Richard Pinedo pleading guilty in February, followed by the indictment of 13 Russians, followed by the lawyer Alexander Vanderswan pleading guilty, followed by the deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump in February pleading guilty. Do you think it's still going nowhere?
Well, the context for my statement was as it related to collusion with Russia. None of the charges that you've referenced have anything to do with collusion. With Manafort, it was bad business dealings prior to Trump's campaign for the presidency. With Papadopoulos and Flynn, it was lying, which they should not have done. And when it comes to the Russian troll farms and the 13 indictments, that's no surprise to anyone. Ari, all over the world, Russia does this. It's an attack not only on our democracy, but on all democracies, and that's why we got to fight against it.
No surprise, but it's Bob Mueller issuing those indictments, and do you think those 13 Russians should be pursued and try to bring them to the U.S. for trial?
Well, there is no mechanism by which we're going to be able to do that. I do think it's important to highlight the fact that Russia does extend its malign influence, not only in the United States, but around the world in elections from Latin America to the Balkans.
I'll give you one mechanism you're probably familiar with. You put out the Interpol warrant, and you try to get any of these folks when they're in an international airport. Would you support that? Do you want them to come stand trial, or is it for some reason you don't?
No, I would have no problem with those individuals if they were to be foolish enough to be at an international airport to be brought to the United States to face that scrutiny. I mean, in a way, this was really a shadow indictment of Putin as much as anything, because it highlights the extent to which the Russian government seeks to undermine democracy as an institution.
And is that a good thing that was a shadow indictment of Mueller?
Absolutely. I look, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, when I travel the world and meet with our intelligence officials, they highlight for me the different tools that Russia uses to undermine elections, whether that's bribing people, which may have happened in the 2016 campaign for all we know, whether that's holding things over people's head, or whether it's trying to use other institutions within society to undermine elections.
So I think one thing that's interesting is anyone listening to you right now, hearing you say that it's good to do the shadow indictment of Putin, it's good to get the progress in the courts of law, it would be good to pick up these people, if we could, as Americans, pick them up from wherever and bring them here for trial. Those are a lot of things that Bob Mueller did. If that's all,
he hasn't picked up anybody yet.
No, I mean, but he's created the legal architecture. You can't pick them. You can't just grab them. At least that's not the way America does it. So if those are all good things, why then do you want to take the source of those things, this special counsel probe, and remove Bob Mueller? And how would you do that when courts have ruled against a president firing a special prosecutor for no valid reason?
Well, I haven't made the argument the president should fire Bob Mueller. I believe that Jeff Sessions should, and I believe we should use the apparatus at the Justice
Jeff Sessions is recused, you know that.
Which is quite a shame, and that recusal is not required under the law, and I believe should be rescinded. But if we were to utilize the apparatus of the Justice Department to do just what you've described, if we were to use our tools at the State Department to highlight what Russia does and to try to align our allies with our defense mechanisms that we should be putting in place, I think that would all be positive.
So
it's the employment of a special counsel, and particularly Bob Mueller.
If you were to get your way and say they have an attorney general, Jeff Sessions or someone else, who removes Bob Mueller, how do you square that with the court's rulings on this? How do you square that with Nader v. Bork?
Well, you know, in what respect? I guess I don't understand the question.
Well, that's the ruling that came up against Nixon. Basically, the court overruled Richard Nixon's firing of the special counsel. Very similar situation,
Right, but I don't think the president should fire the special counsel.
They said the prosecutor investigating him doing that to try to remove him was illegal, and they don't serve at the president's pleasure. So how do you square your desire to remove Mueller with that kind of court precedent?
Well, that court precedent dealt with the President of the United States apparently personally engaging in that personnel decision. No one is suggesting that here. I'm suggesting that the Attorney General appropriately constrained the review to collusion, which, if there's evidence of, we should all see.
Well,
but we have no evidence of collusion.
Respectfully, I'll suggest that there is a suggestion that the president wants to remove Mueller, because the New York Times reported, and Don McGahn has not denied, that there was an effort to get Don McGahn to fire Mueller, 1, and then to get Don McGahn to lie about it to the Mueller probe, 2, and then we got the second New York Times report. You're aware of that.
Well, I have no personal knowledge of that. It's my view that the Attorney General should seize leadership of the Department of Justice and that the President should not concern himself with such things.
Okay. Let me play for you as well Rod Rosenstein, who is the current boss of Bob Mueller, as you and I know. This was basically, well, let me read for you what he said. The special counsel is not an unguided missile. I don't believe there's any justification for terminating the special counsel. Is he wrong?
I think so. I think that based on the team that Bob Mueller assembled, it was like he was, you know, fishing in the Hillary Clinton fan club aquarium, finding people who had defended the Clinton Foundation against FOIA requests, who had attended Hillary Clinton's election night party. I think we've got a lot of very talented people throughout the Department of Justice, and unfortunately we chose people who seem not only to have a political bias towards Hillary Clinton, but manifested that bias.
You talk about that bias. I've heard about that. Let me read to you from the Trump administration. This is White House aide Hogan Gidley. He says, regarding McCabe and some of these other issues, top officials at the FBI have engaged in conduct that shows bias for Hillary Clinton, similar to what you just said. Then you have the Trump DOJ letter for firing Comey, which says the FBI was biased against Clinton, and that Jim Comey was unfair to Clinton. I guess I would ask you, which is it?
My assessment is that Hillary Clinton had people both at the FBI and at the Department of Justice that were paving the way to ensure that she never faced any consequences. I hold that view as a consequence of being a part of the interview of Andrew McCabe and reviewing the emails McCabe sent depriving the Washington field office of jurisdiction to review that matter and instead bringing it up to the head shed, where then you had a variety of revisions to the exoneration statement. So that's my factual basis for my view that there was a pro-Hillary bias. But remember, the FBI and the Department of Justice, they're not monolithic entities. They're made up of individuals, and probably, Ari, there were people that rooted for Hillary Clinton in both of those agencies and people who rooted for Trump in both those agencies.
So in conclusion, you're saying we're all just people?
Well, I think that there were some people who manifested their bias improperly against the president and for Hillary Clinton. That's why I'm pushing our own leadership to advance our investigation.
I appreciate you coming here and taking the questions. I think you're on a little bit of a legal island because you have Rosenstein disagreeing with you. You have the court precedents in Nader v. Bork, which are binding here, disagreeing with you.
I don't disagree with those because I don't think the president should fire Mueller.
But the president does because he's been talking about that. But Congressman Gaetz, part of the reason I come to Washington is to be face-to-face with people. I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.